Hello, I'm Dr. Tyler Bland, and in this video, I'd like to show you how to play the Medimon card game. To start the game, you'll first need your deck of 60 cards, any sort of status tokens, and dice. You will also need to use some sort of counter to mark player life. This can either be an app, which will show you a free one that you can use here in a moment, or you can just write it down on paper. Each deck consists 4 main card types. Medimon cards, which represent Medimon and can be played to perform actions. Building cards, which can be played and when staffed with specific Medimon cards, perform an action. Treatment cards, which are played to perform an action. And ATP cards, which are played and provide the energy required for certain Medimon card actions to take place. Note that cards can only be played during a player's play phase, unless it has one of the quick symbols here. This can be played at any time, either during a player's turn or during an opponent's turn. At the beginning of the game, each player will take their Medimon deck, shuffle, and then they can draw 7 cards. This is now the player's starting hand. We do have a mulligan option where the player can shuffle their original hand back into the deck and draw an additional 7 cards. This can only be performed once, and it can only be performed at the very start of the game. Each turn consists of 4 phases: a draw phase, a play phase, an attack phase, and a rest phase. Let's see how each of those work. For the draw phase, at the beginning of a player's turn, a player will draw 1 card from their deck. Let's look at an example hand. In this hand, there are 4 Medimon cards, 2 ATP, and 1 building card. For this player's play phase, they may play any cards that they can afford. And so if we look at the cost of a card, the card cost can be seen up here with how much ATP it takes to play this card. So for Adrenal Medulla, I need 1 ATP in order to play the card. Each turn, a player can only play 1 ATP per turn. And so as this player has 2 ATP cards, only one of them may be played, and the second one can be reserved to play for the next turn. So as an example, with this starting hand, the player may first play an ATP card, and now that the player has 1 ATP card, they may now play any card that costs 1 ATP or less. And so for our example, Adrenal Medulla costs 1 ATP. They may now use this ATP card by turning it sideways, representing that it is used, to play the Adrenal Medulla card. Now when Medimon cards are played, they cannot perform any actions. And so this would end the player's play phase, because they have no more ATP in order to play other cards. Let's look at another example turn. In this one, we will look at the attack phase. So for this player, they have 4 available ATP cards and 2 Medimon cards, which they have played in previous turns, which means that this turn, they are able to attack. For this instance, I will go ahead and decide to attack another player with Adrenal Cortex. Let's look at this card. For the Adrenal Cortex card, there is a static ability, Stress Management, which allows me to change a dice roll by +1 or -1 each turn. For an attacking move, you can see here we have the sword with a 3. This means that I will attack and perform 3 damage. This also has an ability below it, where when I attack, I will roll a die. If I roll a 1 or a 2, I deal 1 damage to any Medi that I control. If I roll a 3 through a 6, I can deal 2 damage to any target. This can either be the opponent that I am attacking or even another opponent. So let's look at an example of battling. In our example of battling, I'm going ahead and attack an opponent with Adrenal Cortex. What I do is I tell the player that I am attacking with this card, and they may now decide what to do with that. They may decide to block with one of their Medimon, such as Hashimoto disease, and so the other player may say, I'm going to block with Hashimoto. In this instance, Adrenal Cortex will deal 3 damage to Hashimoto, and so this will be represented by taking a die and placing 3 damage on him. Notice that he has 5 health, which means he is still alive. Now, with the ability here, I also can roll a die. And so I'll take one of my die and I'll roll it. It is a 6. And so now I may deal 2 additional damage to either Hashimoto or any other Medi target. If I decided to deal it to Hashimoto, this would then go from 3 plus 2 to 5. All right. Which Hashimoto has 5 health, and so he would die. But he still does damage back. And so his attack is Bulldozer, 3 plus. This means that he will do 3 damage back to Adrenal Cortex, as well as plus X damage, that where X equals any number of Medis that have a sleep token. Let's say that there are 1 Medi in play that has a sleep token, so he would do 3 plus 1, which would be 4. And so we would take a die, and we would add 4 damage to Adrenal Cortex. This is equal to and above his health, and so both Medimon would die. Say the player decided to not block with Hashimoto disease, but instead just wanted to take the damage themselves. And so instead of putting Hashimoto disease out, the player would decrease their life by 3. So they would go from, if they haven't been hit yet, 25 down to 22. One example of a life counter that can be used is the MTG Life Counter Lotus. You can either use this on your phone, either through the iOS App Store or Google Play, or you can go ahead and just use it on the web. Let's take a look at this. So for a 4-player setup, you would have 4 different players, each with 25 life. If one person, say this player, got hit with 3 damage to the player himself, then you would decrease it by 3 down to 22. Once a player gets down to 0 life, so for instance, if this player was at 3 and the player got hit with 3 damage, they would go down to 0 and that player is now out of the game. The win condition for the game is last player standing. So once all the other players have reached 0 player life, the last player remaining is the winner. The player would still roll the die, and so a die would be rolled 6, and they would be able to do 2 damage to any other Medi, either from the player that they are attacking or to any other player. Adrenal Cortex would then go back to the player's hand, and it would come back sideways, representing that it is exhausted. Now it would come back to the player's hand in an exhausted state. This means that during the other player's turn, if they were to attack this player with, say, their Hashimoto disease, Adrenal Cortex is exhausted and could not be used to block, whereas Adrenal Medulla is not exhausted and could be used to block. Let's look at an example of a building card. For building cards, we have the staff mechanic. What this means is that you can take one of your in-play Medimon cards and staff the building, allowing the building function to occur. In this card, if the building is staffed, you're able to draw a card. So I just staffed it with my Adrenal Medulla. I can draw a card and put it into my hand. This also allows me to do a gamble at all, which means that once per turn, if staffed, which I have just staffed with Adrenal Medulla, I can roll a die and I can perform any functions that the card has. If a Medimon is staffing a building, it is considered in an exhausted state, and it cannot be used to block attacks. And so if the opponent was to attack with Hashimoto again, I could not use Adrenal Medulla to attack. In this instance, also, if I had previously attacked with Adrenal Cortex and he was exhausted, if Hashimoto disease were to attack, I have no available Medimon to block, and so thus I would take all of the damage as the player. The last phase of a player's turn is the rest phase. In this phase, they may take any 2 unused ATP card, use them by turning it sideways in order to draw another card into their hand. So if this is the instance, 2 are used, I can then use 2 more and draw an additional card. Now, a max hand is 7 cards, which means that a player can draw as many cards as I want, but at the very conclusion of their turn, they must discard down to 7 cards. Now, if we continue on this example hand, once the other players have performed their turns and it comes back to this player, the player will then start their hand with the draw phase by drawing a card into their hand and refreshing all exhausted cards, including ATP and Medimon cards. This means that they are now able to be used, both ATP and as well as Medimon cards, in order to attack. Next, let's look at our tokens. These include Inflammation, where when added to a Medimon, it takes 1 damage at the beginning of each turn. So, as an example, if Hashimoto had the Inflammation token added to him, during the player's next turn, they would then receive 1 damage at the beginning of their turn. This is maintained until the Inflammation token has been removed. The next token is a Sleep token. When this is added to a Medimon, this means that it cannot perform a move, either attacking, and it cannot block. And so, if a Medimon has a Sleep token on it, and the player was to be attacked by another Medimon, it cannot be used to block, and during that player's turn, it cannot attack. During phase 1, the draw phase, when other cards are exhausted, they are refreshed, and if any card has a Sleep token on it, that Sleep token is removed. The next token is the Fatigue token. The Fatigue token, when added, decreases the attack damage performed by however many Fatigue tokens are on. In this case, Aldoster Stone normally attacks for 3, but with the Fatigue token on, it will now only attack for 2. And our next one is the Strengthen token. This one does the opposite of the Fatigue. And so when this is added to a Medi, Aldoster Stone normally performs 3, but with the Strengthen token, it will now attack for 4. The next one is the Shield token. When the Shield token is added, any attack damage directed to this Medimon will decrease by 1. As an example, if a player was attacking with Hashimoto, that would perform attack of 3. Adrenal Cortex would only receive 2 of that damage, having this decrease that attack damage by 1. And our last one is the Fragile token. When this is added, it performs the opposite function of the Shield token, in that if a Medimon was attacking, say, for 3, Adrenal Cortex, we would increase that to 4. Those are all of our status tokens, but we also have a token representing any Medimon. An example of this use would be with C-cell hyperplasia. And C-cell hyperplasia, it has the move Multiply. When a player pays 2 ATP, they may create a C-cell token Medi, which has 1 health and 1 attack. Also, this move can only be performed up to 2 times per turn. So in this instance, a player may pay 2 ATP to add a C-cell token representing a C-cell card. They may also spend 2 more to add an additional one. These are representing cards, and so they can also attack, and they can attack for 1 and have 1 health, and they can also be used to block. And so if Hashimoto disease were attacking, this player may decide to use one of their tokens with 1 health to absorb the 3 damage that Hashimoto would do. This also shows that there is no pass-through of damage. And so if Hashimoto disease attacks for 3, our C-cell token only has 1, but those remaining 2 damage does not pass through to any of the other medis. It absorbs all of that damage and then is removed, but also does 1 damage back to Hashimoto disease. Now a player may also decide to block with multiple cards. So in this instance, what would happen is Hashimoto disease is attacking for 3. The player decides to block with 3 different medis, 1 card, and 2 of the medi tokens. And they may decide what damage will occur. And so I'll start with this. He receives 1 damage, but he does 1 damage back. So Hashimoto is now at 1. Hashimoto attacked with 3 and already did 1 to the original one. So now he has 2 left. So he will do 1 to this one, which will die, but will also do damage back up to 2. And so now there's 1 attack left on Bulldozer. And so Adrenal Cortex will get hit with that 1. And then we'll attack for 3 back, bringing this up to 5, as well as our roll-in ability, which we'll skip for the time being. And this would kill Hashimoto disease, and Adrenal Cortex would come back with 1 damage.